The man stands perfectly still in his apartment, confused. His fingers hover over piano keys, unsure which notes to press next. Benjamin Mitchell has never taken a piano lesson in his life. He cannot read sheet music. Yet somehow his hands know fragments of a Mozart sonata. He presses a key experimentally, then another. His fingers begin to move with increasing confidence, producing a melody he has no conscious memory of learning. It started after the accident, Benjamin explains later, sitting across from neuropsychologist Dr. Fiona Lawson. I woke up from the coma with these abilities. My conscious mind has no idea how to play, but my hands remember something I never learned. Dr. Lawson nods, unsurprised. Your case isn't unique, Benjamin. What you're experiencing has a name: procedural memory functioning in the absence of declarative memory. Your body remembers what your mind doesn't. This phenomenon, where bodily knowledge operates independently from conscious awareness, isn't just a curiosity of neuroscience. It represents one of the most profound insights into human consciousness. We are not single, unified beings. We are collections of memory systems that evolved at different times for different purposes, operating with surprising independence from one another. The human memory system isn't a single entity but a complex network of specialized systems. When Benjamin's hands find piano keys he consciously doesn't recognize, we're witnessing these separate systems in unusually stark relief. His procedural memory, the body's knowledge, functions while his declarative memory, conscious recollection, remains unaware. What does it mean that parts of us can know things that we, our conscious selves, do not? How deep does this separation go? And what might it reveal about the nature of human consciousness itself? To understand this mystery, we must journey through laboratories where amnesiacs perform impossible feats, operating rooms where awake patients report no pain while their bodies reveal otherwise, and cutting-edge research revealing how trauma imprints itself onto our physical being even when our minds have forgotten. Along the way, we will discover that the boundary between body and mind is not just blurry, it may be largely illusory. Our story begins in 1953, with a man known in the medical literature only as H.M. Henry Molaison was 27 years old when surgeons removed significant portions of his medial temporal lobes, including most of his hippocampus, in a desperate attempt to cure his debilitating epilepsy. The surgery succeeded in reducing his seizures but created an unexpected side effect. Henry could no longer form new long-term memories. Each person he met, each book he read, each meal he ate, all vanished from his mind approximately 30 seconds after they occurred. In the decades that followed, Henry became the most studied individual in the history of neuroscience. Researchers were particularly fascinated by an apparent contradiction in his abilities. While Henry couldn't remember recent events or recognize people he'd met numerous times, he could learn and improve at certain skills. Neuropsychologist Brenda Milner developed a mirror drawing task for Henry. Each day, Henry would practice tracing the outline of a star while only being able to see his hand in a mirror, a notoriously difficult skill requiring fine motor coordination. Despite having no recollection of ever performing the task before, Henry's performance improved dramatically over time. Each day I would enter the room, Milner later recounted, and Henry would greet me as a complete stranger. Yet when I placed the mirror and paper before him, his hand moved with increasing skill. When I commented on his improvement, he looked genuinely surprised and insisted he had never done the task before. This profound disconnect between what Henry consciously knew and what his body had learned provided the first compelling evidence that human memory was not a single system but multiple systems working in parallel. Henry's explicit, declarative memory, the conscious recollection of facts and experiences, was severely impaired, but his implicit, procedural memory, the unconscious knowledge of how to perform tasks, remained largely intact. I consider working with HM to be my great privilege, Dr. Milner reflected years later. He taught us that memory isn't one thing. It's many systems that can operate independently. The implications were staggering. If these memory systems could function independently, what did that mean for our understanding of consciousness? If parts of us could learn and remember without us knowing about it, who exactly was in charge? These questions launched decades of research into the multiple memory systems that operate within us, often without our conscious awareness. By the 1980s, scientists had identified at least 5 distinct memory systems in the human brain, each with different neural circuits, different evolutionary origins, and different relationships to conscious awareness. The story of Benjamin Mitchell, our pianist who mysteriously gained musical abilities after his coma, provides a contemporary window into this fascinating realm where body knowledge operates independently from conscious awareness. But to fully understand his case and what it reveals about human consciousness, we need to explore how scientists have mapped these parallel memory systems and the surprising ways they interact, or fail to interact, with our conscious experience. In 1985, psychology professor Larry Squire proposed a distinction that has since become foundational: declarative versus non-declarative memory. Declarative memory, the kind that Henry Molaison lost, includes everything we consciously know and can declare: facts, events, people, places. Non-declarative memory includes everything else: skills, habits, conditioned responses, and other forms of learning that operate beneath conscious awareness. It's a profound distinction, explains Dr. Fiona Lawson. Declarative memory is what most people think of as memory, the conscious recollection of information. But non-declarative memory systems are equally important and often more powerful in shaping our behavior, even though we're rarely aware of their influence. This distinction helps explain Benjamin's mysterious piano playing. After his coma, something unusual happened. His procedural memory system somehow acquired piano-playing skills that never registered in his declarative memory. His fingers know the music even though he does not. But how could this happen? How could Benjamin's body learn something his conscious mind never experienced? To answer this question, we must delve deeper into how memories form and where they reside in the brain and body. The conventional view holds that memories are stored primarily in the connections between neurons in the brain. When we learn something new, whether it's a fact or a physical skill, certain neurons strengthen their connections, creating an enduring pattern that represents that memory. Yet this view is incomplete. Recent research reveals that memories, especially bodily memories, don't just reside in the brain. They inhabit our entire physical being. Consider a 2018 study from Northwestern University, where researchers demonstrated that memories can be stored in the very cells of our immune system. They found that when mice were exposed to a specific odor paired with a mild shock, their immune cells remembered this association. Later, when these immune cells were transferred to different mice who had never experienced the odor or shock, the recipient mice nonetheless showed fear responses when exposed to the same odor. The implications are revolutionary, says immunobiologist Frederick Lance. It means memory isn't just neural. Our entire bodies, down to the cellular level, participate in memory formation and storage. This cellular memory extends to our muscles, connective tissues, and even our gut microbiome. Athletes call it muscle memory, but scientists now understand it's more complex than that term suggests. When we learn physical skills, from typing to swimming to playing piano, the adaptations occur throughout our bodies. Muscles develop specific fiber compositions, fascia arranges itself for optimal movement patterns, even our peripheral nervous system adapts to support the skill. The body doesn't just execute what the brain commands, explains kinesiologist Patricia Ross. The body itself learns, adapts, and remembers independently of conscious brain processes. In highly trained pianists, for example, we see specialized adaptations in the tendons of their fingers that aren't present in non-musicians. These adaptations aren't directed by conscious thought. They're the body's autonomous response to repeated practice. But this still doesn't explain how Benjamin could play piano fragments without ever having practiced. To understand his case, we must explore an even stranger phenomenon: memory transfers. In rare cases following organ transplantation, recipients have reported acquiring memories, preferences, or skills that later turned out to belong to their donors. While many such claims remain anecdotal, some have been documented with sufficient rigor to warrant scientific investigation. In 2015, researchers at the University of Arizona documented the case of a heart transplant recipient who developed inexplicable cravings for foods she had previously disliked. After contacting the donor's family, she discovered these were precisely the favorite foods of her heart donor. More remarkably, she found herself able to play fragments of songs on the piano, something she had never learned to do, and later discovered her donor had been an accomplished pianist. These cases challenge our fundamental understanding of where memories reside, notes neuroscientist Gabriel Thomas. If memories can transfer with organs, it suggests memory storage extends throughout the body in ways we're only beginning to comprehend. Cellular memory may partially explain this phenomenon. Organs contain their own neural networks. The heart, for instance, has approximately 40,000 neurons, as well as cells that may retain molecular configurations shaped by the donor's experiences. When transplanted, these cellular patterns might influence the recipient's bodily systems in subtle yet meaningful ways. For Benjamin Mitchell, however, there was no transplant to explain his acquired piano skills. His case represents something even more mysterious: the emergence of procedural memories with no apparent source. Cases like Benjamin's force us to consider the possibility of cryptomnesia, hidden memories, explains Dr. Lawson. Perhaps he was exposed to piano music during his coma when his declarative memory systems were offline, but his procedural systems remained functional. Or perhaps he had brief piano exposure in childhood that registered only in his procedural systems. But there's another, more radical possibility: that Benjamin's body tapped into what some researchers call morphic resonance, the controversial hypothesis that similar patterns of activity can resonate across space and time, allowing skills to transfer between individuals without conventional learning. While mainstream science remains skeptical of this concept, proponents point to phenomena like the 100th monkey effect, where once a critical number of individuals in a population learn a skill, other isolated members of the species suddenly display the same ability without observable learning pathways. "I'm not suggesting anything supernatural," clarifies Dr. Lawson, "but we're discovering that information transfer in biological systems can occur through mechanisms we don't yet fully understand. Electromagnetic fields, quantum effects at the cellular level, resonance phenomena. These are active areas of research that may eventually explain cases like Benjamin's. Whatever the explanation, Benjamin's experience highlights the profound independence of our multiple memory systems. His conscious mind remains genuinely baffled by abilities his body confidently displays. And this disconnect occurs not just in rare or pathological cases. It's a fundamental feature of human consciousness that shapes our everyday experience in ways we rarely recognize. When professional tennis players return a serve traveling at over 150 miles per hour, they aren't consciously calculating trajectories or deliberately positioning their rackets. Their bodies react before conscious awareness could possibly keep pace. The conscious player experiences this as being in the zone, a state where the body seems to know what to do without conscious direction. This separation between bodily knowing and conscious awareness extends far beyond physical skills. It shapes our emotions, our social interactions, even our sense of self. Consider the phenomenon of emotional contagion, our tendency to catch the emotions of those around us. When you enter a room where tension hangs in the air, your body responds before your conscious mind registers the situation. Your heart rate changes, your muscles tense, stress hormones release into your bloodstream. All before you consciously think, "There's something wrong here." Your body knows first. Your conscious mind catches up later. This pattern, body knowledge preceding conscious awareness, appears consistently across human experience. It reflects our evolutionary history, where rapid bodily responses to environmental threats provided crucial survival advantages. Consciousness, with its deliberative processing, evolved later as an additional layer of cognition, not as a replacement for these faster bodily systems. We tend to think consciousness is in charge, notes neuropsychologist Amelia Parker. But that's largely an illusion. By the time we consciously decide to act, our bodies have often already initiated the action. Consciousness is more like a CEO who takes credit for decisions that were largely made by subordinates before the information even reached the executive suite. This insight emerges vividly in laboratory studies of decision-making. In a famous experiment by neuroscientist Benjamin Libet in the 1980s, participants were asked to spontaneously flick their wrists whenever they felt the urge while watching a specialized clock. They noted the moment they consciously decided to move. Meanwhile, electrodes recorded when their brain activity actually began preparing for the movement. The results were startling. The brain began preparing for movement up to 700 milliseconds before participants became consciously aware of their decision to move. Their bodies knew what they were going to do significantly before their conscious minds did. Later studies using brain imaging have confirmed and extended these findings. In some cases, researchers can predict which button a person will press up to 7 seconds before the person becomes aware of their own choice. These studies fundamentally challenge our intuitive sense of conscious causation, explains neurophilosopher Ryan Drake. We experience ourselves as conscious agents making decisions that our bodies then carry out. But the evidence suggests a different relationship. Bodily systems often initiate actions, and consciousness then constructs a story about having decided to do what the body was already doing. This has profound implications for how we understand human behavior, especially in areas like addiction, where the body develops powerful response patterns that operate largely independently of conscious intention. Consider the case of Felicity Larson, a recovering alcoholic who participated in a 2017 study at Massachusetts General Hospital. While in an fMRI scanner, Felicity was shown subliminal images of alcoholic beverages, flashed too quickly for conscious recognition. Despite having no conscious awareness of seeing alcohol cues, her brain's reward pathways activated intensely, and her body showed measurable physiological responses: increased heart rate, skin conductance changes, and dopamine release. "I didn't see anything related to alcohol," Felicity reported afterward. "But the researchers showed me the data, and my body clearly responded as if I'd seen a drink. It's terrifying to realize my body remembers and reacts to triggers I'm not even consciously aware of." This bodily remembering extends beyond addiction to encompass trauma, where the phenomenon of somatic memory, body-based recollection of traumatic events, can persist even when conscious memory fails. Dr. Fiona Lawson explains, trauma survivors often experience physical reactions, racing heart, muscle tension, fight or flight responses, to triggers they consciously don't recognize. Their bodies remember what their minds have protected them from. This phenomenon becomes particularly evident in cases of childhood trauma, where explicit memories may be limited by the immaturity of hippocampal structures responsible for declarative memory, but implicit bodily memories form nonetheless. Children under 3 rarely form explicit memories we can consciously recall later, notes developmental psychologist Amanda Chun. But their bodies absolutely record experiences during this period. This explains why early childhood trauma can shape adult behavior patterns and physiological responses, even when there's no conscious memory of the traumatic events. The revolutionary field of polyvagal theory, developed by neuroscientist Stephen Porges, provides a framework for understanding these bodily memories of safety and danger. According to this theory, our autonomic nervous system constantly evaluates environmental risk without conscious input, creating what Porges calls neuroception, bodily risk assessment that occurs below conscious awareness. When the body detects signs reminiscent of past danger, whether we consciously recognize them or not, it shifts into defensive physiological states. Heart rate variability changes, digestion slows, muscle tension increases, and social engagement systems shut down. We experience these shifts as anxiety, irritability, or numbness without necessarily knowing why. The body keeps the score. Psychiatrist Bessel van der Kolk famously observed in his groundbreaking work on trauma. The memories of trauma are encoded not just in conscious narrative but in the very tissues of our being. Recent advances in epigenetics, the study of how experiences can influence gene expression without changing genetic code, have provided a molecular mechanism for how these bodily memories form. Traumatic experiences can alter how genes are expressed in neurons, immune cells, and throughout the body, creating enduring changes in how physiological systems operate. Most remarkably, these epigenetic changes can be passed to subsequent generations. Studies of Holocaust survivors and their descendants have identified specific epigenetic markers related to stress hormones that appear in children and grandchildren who never experienced the original trauma. The body remembers across generations in ways the conscious mind cannot. What we're discovering about transgenerational trauma transmission is revolutionary, explains epigeneticist Sarah Montgomery. It suggests that our bodies carry ancestral memories, physiological echoes of what our forebears experienced that shape our own nervous system development and stress responses. This research on trauma provides crucial context for understanding Benjamin Mitchell's mysterious piano abilities. The coma that preceded his unusual skill acquisition resulted from a car accident, a traumatic event that may have reconfigured his memory systems in ways neuroscience is only beginning to comprehend. Physical trauma can disrupt the usual boundaries between memory systems, explains neurologist Marcus Brewer. The brain injury Benjamin sustained likely altered the normal checks and balances between his declarative and procedural memory systems, allowing procedural learning to occur without the usual accompanying declarative memory formation. But Benjamin's case has another layer of complexity. During his 3-week coma, his parents played Mozart piano sonatas in his hospital room, hoping the music might stimulate his recovery. This exposure occurred while his conscious mind was inactive, but his procedural memory systems potentially remained receptive. We know that comatose patients can form certain types of memories even without consciousness, explains clinical neuropsychologist Andrea Winters. Their auditory processing systems often remain active, and there's evidence that information presented during coma can influence subsequent behavior after recovery, even without conscious recall of the exposure. This phenomenon isn't unique to coma patients. Studies of implicit learning during general anesthesia have demonstrated that patients can form memories of information presented while they're unconscious. In one remarkable study, patients under general anesthesia were played recordings containing nonsense words at specific intervals. After recovery, when asked to choose between words they'd never consciously heard, they showed statistically significant preferences for the words played during surgery, despite having no conscious memory of hearing them. The boundary between consciousness and unconsciousness isn't as clear-cut as we once thought, explains anesthesiologist Daniel Ramirez. Parts of our cognitive and memory systems remain active even when conscious awareness is suppressed. This creates fascinating possibilities for learning and memory formation outside conscious experience. For Benjamin, this meant that while his conscious mind was offline during coma, his procedural memory systems potentially absorbed elements of the Mozart sonatas played at his bedside. When he recovered, these musical patterns emerged as fragmented but genuine piano-playing abilities despite no conscious exposure to piano lessons. It's like his hands learned while he was away, observes Dr. Lawson. His procedural memory system encoded these musical patterns without his declarative memory having any access to that learning process. This disconnection between conscious knowledge and bodily knowledge extends into another fascinating domain: blindsight. This remarkable phenomenon occurs in people who have damage to their primary visual cortex, resulting in cortical blindness, the inability to consciously see in portions of their visual field. Despite reporting no conscious visual perception, blindsight patients can respond accurately to visual stimuli in their blind fields. When forced to guess whether a light flashed or which direction an object moved in their blind spot, they perform far better than chance while insisting they're just guessing, because they didn't see anything. Blind sight provides one of the most compelling demonstrations of the separation between conscious awareness and bodily knowledge, explains vision neuroscientist Tyler Walsh. These patients' visual systems are processing information and guiding behavior without that information ever reaching conscious awareness. In one striking demonstration, a blind sight patient was asked to walk down a hallway scattered with obstacles placed entirely within his blind field. Despite reporting no visual awareness of the obstacles, he navigated around them flawlessly, unconsciously adjusting his path to avoid collisions. When asked how he avoided objects he couldn't see, he responded with genuine confusion. "Did I avoid something? I didn't see anything there." This phenomenon arises because vision involves multiple parallel pathways in the brain. The primary visual cortex, damaged in blind sight patients, is essential for conscious visual experience. But alternate pathways, particularly through the superior colliculus and pulvinar, can process visual information and guide behavior without generating conscious perception. What blind sight reveals, explains Walsh, is that consciousness isn't necessary for remarkably sophisticated processing and behavior. These patients' bodies know what their minds don't. Similar disconnections between conscious perception and bodily response appear in studies of subliminal emotional processing. When threatening images are presented too quickly for conscious recognition, the body still responds. Pupils dilate, heart rate changes, and the amygdala, a brain structure central to emotion processing, activates. The body recognizes and responds to emotional significance before and sometimes without conscious awareness ever occurring. This gives rise to what we commonly call intuition, those gut feelings that guide our decisions before we can articulate why. Intuition isn't mysterious or mystical, explains social psychologist Francis Riley. It's the conscious surface of deep bodily knowledge, your systems recognizing patterns they've encountered before and generating somatic responses that rise into vague awareness as feelings about a situation. This understanding transforms how we view expertise in fields from firefighting to chess to medical diagnosis. When experienced firefighters report just knowing it's time to evacuate a burning building, they're accessing bodily pattern recognition that processes subtle cues like the color and movement of smoke or the sounds of the fire, patterns their bodies have learned through years of experience. Their expertise isn't just in their conscious mind but distributed throughout their perceptual and response systems. Their bodies know things their conscious minds might not be able to articulate. This bodily knowing becomes particularly evident in what psychologist Gary Klein calls recognition-primed decision-making. Studying how firefighters make life-or-death decisions under pressure, Klein discovered they rarely compare options consciously. Instead, they instantly recognize situations based on bodily pattern matching and take appropriate action before conscious deliberation could possibly occur. When I interviewed firefighters about their decision processes, Klein reported, they often said, "I didn't make a decision. I just knew what to do." Their bodies recognized patterns and initiated responses faster than consciousness could keep pace. We see this same phenomenon in expert musicians like cellist Francesca Lopez, who describes entering a state where conscious thought disappears during performance. "My hands know the music better than my mind does. If I start thinking consciously about the notes or fingering, I make mistakes. But when I let my body play, everything flows." This reliance on bodily knowledge rather than conscious deliberation characterizes expertise across domains. Chess grandmasters report seeing the right move rather than calculating it. Emergency physicians make accurate diagnoses based on pattern recognition that occurs before conscious reasoning. In each case, the body knows first. Consciousness follows, often constructing explanations after the fact for decisions the body has already made. We have the relationship backward in our cultural understanding, argues cognitive scientist Brian Adams. We think conscious thought directs bodily action, but often it's the reverse. Bodily systems recognize patterns and initiate responses, and consciousness then constructs a story about having decided to do what the body was already doing. This insight transforms our understanding of decision-making. The influential dual-process theory of cognition, developed by psychologists like Daniel Kahneman, distinguishes between System 1, fast, intuitive, emotional, and System 2, slow, deliberative, logical thinking. What's now becoming clear is that System 1 isn't just a faster version of conscious thought. It's largely bodily knowledge operating outside conscious awareness. And it's not inherently inferior to deliberative System 2 thinking. In many complex, real-world situations, this bodily knowledge processes more variables more effectively than conscious deliberation ever could. The body can track and integrate thousands of variables simultaneously, explains decision researcher Maya Peterson. Conscious thought, by contrast, can hold only about 7 pieces of information in working memory at once. For many complex judgments, trusting bodily knowledge, what we call intuition, actually produces better outcomes than attempting to reason through every factor consciously. This understanding helps explain why in studies of complex decisions, like choosing an apartment with many relevant features, people who are distracted from conscious deliberation often make better choices than those who analyze every factor explicitly. The distracted participants give their bodily knowledge systems time to integrate information without conscious interference, resulting in better pattern recognition and judgment. For Benjamin Mitchell, this division between conscious and bodily knowledge manifests dramatically when he sits at the piano. His conscious mind genuinely doesn't know how to play, yet his fingers find their way to certain passages with confidence. When I try to think about what I'm playing, everything falls apart, Benjamin explains. But if I just let my hands move, they find these fragments of music I've never learned. It's like my fingers are possessed by someone else's memories. 6 months after beginning work with Dr. Lawson, Benjamin has expanded his mysterious repertoire. While he still cannot read music or consciously identify the pieces he plays, his hands now reliably produce segments from 5 different Mozart compositions, all sonatas that were played during his coma. What's particularly fascinating, notes Dr. Lawson, is that Benjamin's playing isn't just mechanical reproduction. He adds subtle expressive elements, dynamic changes and phrasing that weren't present in the recordings played during his coma. His bodily knowledge systems aren't just mimicking but interpreting the music. This creative dimension of bodily knowledge challenges our cultural tendency to associate creativity exclusively with conscious thought. Across domains from music to mathematics, breakthroughs often emerge not from conscious reasoning but from bodily systems operating beneath awareness. Consider mathematician Andrew Wiles, who spent 7 years trying to prove Fermat's last theorem. The critical insight came not during conscious work but while he was walking away from his desk. Suddenly, totally unexpectedly, an incredible revelation came, he later recalled. Nothing I had ever done before was like this experience. This pattern appears repeatedly in accounts of creative breakthroughs. Chemist Auguste Kekulé discovered the ring structure of benzene while daydreaming about a snake biting its tail. Composer Brahms described his creative process as listening to what emerged rather than consciously constructing music. In each case, bodily knowledge systems continued processing problems beneath conscious awareness, accessing pattern recognition capabilities far exceeding what conscious deliberation could achieve. The conscious mind proposes, but the body disposes, suggests creativity researcher Eliana Turner. Our most profound creative insights often emerge from bodily knowledge systems that operate largely independently of consciousness. For Benjamin Mitchell, this bodily creativity manifests when he improvises around the Mozart fragments his hands mysteriously know. While his conscious mind remains baffled by his abilities, his fingers explore musical variations with growing confidence. It's terrifying and wonderful, Benjamin says. I feel like I'm watching someone else play through my hands. Yet it's also deeply familiar, like remembering something I never knew I knew. This sensation, familiarity without conscious recognition, characterizes many experiences where bodily knowledge operates independently of conscious awareness. It appears in déjà vu experiences, where places feel familiar despite no conscious memory of them. It emerges in implicit bias, where behaviors reveal attitudes that contradict conscious beliefs. This disconnect between what we consciously know and what our bodies know raises profound questions about human identity. If I don't know things that my body knows, who exactly am I? If my bodily systems make decisions before I become aware of deciding, who is the true agent of my actions? These questions have spawned rich philosophical debate. Some theorists, like philosopher Daniel Dennett, suggest consciousness is largely an after-the-fact narrative construction, a story we tell ourselves about actions our bodily systems have already initiated. Others, like neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, propose that consciousness emerges from the brain's mapping of bodily states. In this view, consciousness isn't separate from bodily knowledge but arises from it, an evolutionary adaptation that allows bodily systems to represent themselves. The separation between body and mind is an illusion, argues Damasio. Consciousness is simply the body's way of knowing itself. This perspective aligns with emerging theories in embodied cognition, which reject traditional views of the brain as a computer processing abstract symbols. Instead, these theories suggest cognition is fundamentally grounded in bodily experience. Our concepts, reasoning, and even consciousness itself arise from and remain connected to our physical embodiment. We don't think with our brains alone, explains cognitive scientist René Martinez. We think with our entire bodies. Our concepts are shaped by how we move through space, how we manipulate objects, how our bodies interact with the world. This embodied perspective helps explain phenomena like emotional intelligence, the ability to recognize and respond appropriately to emotional states in ourselves and others. This capacity depends significantly on bodily knowledge that operates beneath conscious awareness. Studies using biofeedback have shown that people's bodies respond physiologically to others' emotions, matching heart rates, breathing patterns, and even subtle muscle movements before conscious recognition occurs. This bodily resonance forms the foundation of empathy and social connection. We feel other states in our bodies before we consciously recognize their emotions, explains social neuroscientist Thomas Rivers. This bodily knowledge guides our social interactions in ways consciousness merely narrates after the fact. The primacy of bodily knowledge appears strikingly in parent-infant interactions, where subtle, nonverbal synchronization occurs without conscious direction. Parents unconsciously match their infants' facial expressions, vocalizations, and movement patterns, creating a bodily dialogue that precedes language. This bodily knowledge, what developmental psychologists call implicit relational knowing, forms the foundation for attachment and shapes neural development. Long before conscious memory systems come online, infants' bodies are learning about relationships in ways that will influence their social functioning throughout life. The body remembers our earliest relationships, explains attachment researcher Naomi Clark. These memories shape how we connect with others throughout life, often without conscious awareness of their influence. For Benjamin Mitchell, exploring the disconnect between his conscious knowledge and his body's mysterious abilities has led to profound philosophical questions about the nature of his own identity. If my hands know things I don't know, he reflects, then who am I? Are my hands really mine if they possess knowledge I can't access? Or am I something larger than my conscious awareness? A collection of knowing systems that sometimes communicate with each other and sometimes don't. These questions echo ancient philosophical traditions that have long recognized the limitations of identifying selfhood exclusively with conscious awareness. Buddhist psychology, for instance, conceptualizes consciousness as just one of 5 aggregates that constitute human experience, alongside physical form, sensation, perception, and mental formations. Modern neuroscience increasingly supports this view of consciousness as a component of human experience rather than its controller or essence. The conscious mind appears to be less the CEO issuing commands and more a press secretary creating coherent narratives about decisions bodily systems have already made. Consciousness isn't in charge, explains philosopher of mind Sophia Greenwood. It's more like a specialized consultant that bodily systems sometimes consult and sometimes bypass entirely. This understanding transforms how we approach everything from learning to psychotherapy to addressing addiction. If significant learning occurs through bodily systems outside conscious control, educational approaches focusing exclusively on conscious understanding miss crucial dimensions of how humans actually acquire knowledge and skills. Similarly, talk therapy alone may have limited effectiveness for issues stored primarily in bodily memory systems. This insight has fueled the development of somatic approaches to psychotherapy that address trauma and other psychological issues through bodily awareness and intervention, rather than exclusively through conscious narrative. For addiction treatment, recognizing the power of bodily memory explains why intellectual understanding of addiction's harms often fails to change behavior. The body has learned powerful response patterns that operate independently of conscious intention, patterns that require bodily approaches to transform. We've been trying to solve bodily problems with conscious solutions, observes addiction specialist Marcus Fenton. But if the problem resides primarily in bodily memory systems, conscious insight alone will never be sufficient. We need approaches that speak directly to the body's knowledge. This perspective is revolutionizing how we understand habit formation and behavior change. Rather than relying on willpower, a conscious resource, effective approaches increasingly focus on restructuring environments to work with rather than against bodily knowledge systems. The body navigates based on cues in the environment, explains behavioral scientist Danielle Morgan. Change the cues, and you change the body's responses, often without requiring conscious effort. For Benjamin Mitchell, working with rather than against his body's mysterious knowledge has transformed his relationship with the piano. Rather than trying to consciously understand or control his unexpected abilities, he has learned to create conditions where his bodily knowledge can express itself most fully. I play best in dim light, with my eyes closed, he explains. When I stop trying to understand what I'm doing and just let my hands move, the music flows. It's taught me something profound about surrender, about trusting knowledge I didn't know I had. This surrender to bodily wisdom represents a radical departure from Western cultural emphasis on conscious control. Yet it aligns with peak performance states described across disciplines from athletics to meditation to creative arts, states where conscious interference recedes and bodily systems operate with remarkable coordination and effectiveness. The highest levels of human performance occur when consciousness gets out of the way, observes performance psychologist Richard Turner. The conscious mind sets intentions and creates conditions, but then steps aside to let bodily knowledge express itself. This understanding reframes the relationship between conscious and bodily knowledge not as hierarchical but as collaborative. Each system has strengths and limitations. Optimal human functioning involves appropriate integration and differentiation between them. The goal isn't to subordinate one system to another, explains Dr. Lawson, but to foster productive communication between them while respecting their different capacities and contributions. For Benjamin, this integration has meant developing a conscious framework that supports rather than interferes with his bodily knowledge. He has learned to recognize conditions that enhance his mysterious abilities and conditions that disrupt them. He has developed rituals that help his conscious mind step aside while his bodily knowledge expresses itself at the piano. Most importantly, he has expanded his sense of identity beyond his conscious awareness to embrace the knowing that resides in his body. I'm more than what I consciously know, Benjamin reflects. My identity includes knowledge systems that operate outside my awareness, but are nonetheless genuinely mine. This expanded self-concept points toward a more integrated understanding of human experience, one that honors both conscious and bodily knowledge as essential aspects of who we are. It challenges the Cartesian dualism that has dominated Western thought for centuries, suggesting instead that mind and body aren't separate entities but aspects of a single, integrated system with multiple modes of knowing. We aren't minds trapped in bodies or bodies controlled by minds, concludes Dr. Lawson. We're embodied consciousnesses, knowing beings whose intelligence resides throughout our physical form, not just in our conscious thoughts. This perspective offers a profound reframing of what it means to be human. We are not simply our conscious thoughts and memories but complex systems of knowing that extend throughout our physical being and operate at multiple levels of awareness. Our bodies remember our earliest relationships, our ancestral histories, our traumatic experiences, and our hard-won skills, often without our conscious minds having any access to these memories. Yet these bodily memories profoundly shape our experiences, our behaviors, and our very sense of self. For Benjamin Mitchell, whose hands remember music his mind never learned, this bodily knowing initially seemed alien, something happening to him rather than an expression of who he is. But as he's come to embrace these mysterious abilities, he's discovered a deeper truth about human experience. The music was always mine, he reflects. Even when I didn't consciously know it, my body remembers things my mind doesn't. But both are equally me. In this integration lies a profound wisdom about human nature. We are not merely what we consciously know ourselves to be, but also what our bodies know, the accumulated wisdom of evolution, development, and experience encoded in our physical being. Our truest self includes both conscious and bodily knowledge, integrated into an embodied consciousness far more profound than either system alone could achieve. The body remembers what the mind forgets, offering us a more complete understanding of ourselves than consciousness alone could ever provide.